Caleb Ford hadn't set foot in a federal building in over 10 years. The former crime reporter looked exhausted, like a man carrying 100 invisible coffins. His voice shook as he placed the envelope on the agent's desk, eyes darting to the walls as if someone was listening. Inside was a single piece of lined paper. No name, just 6 words. Under the altar, they still scream. Agent Thomas Rourke stared at it, unblinking. He had transferred from D.C. after a case that broke him, one where a kidnapped boy was found 3 minutes too late. This smelled like desperation. But desperation was the only reason he still showed up to work. He followed the address scribbled on the envelope, St. Mary's Chapel, buried deep in Vermont woods, no cell service for miles. The road was so silent it made him nervous. Trees stood like witnesses. The church looked pristine, too pristine for a place that hadn't hosted a mass in years. Ivy crept up its stone walls, but the cross on top gleamed like it had been polished that morning. Inside, he was greeted by Father Ezra Grange, whose expression never changed. His eyes were quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that knows how to hide things. Rourke pretended to be polite, asking about the history, the architecture, the renovations. Grange answered everything without hesitation, but never with feeling. The kind of man who smiled without his face moving. That night, Rourke came back alone. He stepped through the dark aisle with nothing but a flashlight and instinct. The church was colder than it should have been. The floor creaked beneath him, not like tension. He stood behind the altar and noticed faint scratches on the floor. Kneeling down, he saw edges of old that didn't match the rest. A hidden panel. He pulled. It groaned open like it hadn't moved in years. A cloud of stale air hit his face. Earth, blood, and something worse. Below, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. No noise. No wind. Just the slow realization that something was very wrong. He descended, each step echoing off stone walls. The flashlight flickered once. Then again. Then he heard it, barely audible. Breathing. Not his. He followed the sound, the beam of light dancing over rusted metal. A door at the end of the hall. Not a door. A hatch. Industrial, bolted shut with more force than grace. Scratches on the inside. Finger length. Desperate. He took out his radio, but there was no signal. He reached for the latch. It groaned. The metal moaned. And then the door opened. The beam of his light cut through dust and silence. 2 figures sat in the corner, too thin to be real, eyes sunken like they hadn't seen light in years. One of them flinched. The other just stared, wide-eyed, barely breathing. A woman, maybe 40. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The man beside her began to cry, soundless, like even his tears had forgotten how to scream. Rourke backed away, stunned. The smell was choking now, mildew, rot, and survival. He closed the hatch, heart pounding, footsteps unsteady. The next morning, he came back with a team. Guns drawn, lights ready. Father Grange stood on the front steps, his robe swaying in the wind. When asked about the cellar, he didn't deny it. They rushed inside, past pews and shadows, to the hatch Rourke had opened alone. They descended, tactical lights flashing against damp stone. They opened more doors. More cells. More people. 19. 19 living ghosts blinked against the light. The agents couldn't speak. Some looked away. Some cried. One of the survivors whispered a name into an agent's chest. Her voice cracked like glass. She said, "We were never supposed to be found." Outside, Rourke stared at the church's cross. It gleamed under the morning sun, clean and untouchable. Behind him, Father Grange was silent in cuffs. And then one of the agents called out, "Sir, there's another door." Then darkness again. The second door was thicker than the first. Steel, hand-welded, with bolts driven straight through stone. It had no handle, only a dented metal slot, like it was made to be opened from the outside, but never closed again. Rourke stood in front of it, heartbeat crawling up his throat. Behind him, agents waited in silence, their weapons lowered but their eyes locked on the door. Something about it felt wrong. Tension. Like it had been waiting to be noticed. He nodded once. A crowbar was forced between the edges, metal screeching against rust. With every pull, something in the air changed. The smell grew colder, more metallic. Not decay. Fear. pure, sealed-in fear. The moment the door cracked open, a sound leaked through. It wasn't a scream. It was worse, a soft, wet gasp, like someone had forgotten how to breathe but still tried. Inside was a tunnel. Low ceiling. Dripping walls. Thick cables ran along the edges, frayed and dead. Flashlights revealed old cameras bolted into stone, all shattered. The group moved slowly, boots crunching over shattered glass and rotting paper. They passed a wall covered in names, scratched and fingernail deep. Some were crossed out. Some were followed by numbers. One said, "I am still here." They reached the first chamber. Inside, 3 people. Barely clothed, covered in layers of dirt and silence. One of them flinched at the light, arms covering their head. The other 2 didn't move at all. Rourke crouched beside the youngest, a teenage boy. His eyes never met the agent's. He just whispered the same phrase over and over, like it was the only thing he remembered. "Don't take me back. Don't take me back. Don't take me back." The medics moved in. Oxygen. Blankets. Stretchers. Rourke stood back, fists clenched. The church above was silent. The ground itself seemed to breathe under his feet. By the end of the day, they had recovered 34 people from beneath St. Mary's Chapel. None had identification. None had fingerprints in the system. None remembered how long they'd been there. Some were too far gone to speak. Some just cried. Some smiled at the ceiling like they were finally in heaven. Rourke sat alone on the back pew that night, the moonlight barely touching the stained glass. He couldn't shake the feeling that the church had wanted to be found. That something had finally cracked open, not just the floor, but the lie it stood on. Then came the first name. One of the survivors, a woman in her 50s with tangled white hair, whispered it to a nurse in the ER. She said it softly, like she knew she'd be punished for remembering. Grange. The nurse passed it on. Rourke heard it, and something inside him nodded. They brought Father Ezra Grange into an interrogation room. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask why. He just sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Rourke stepped in, closed the door, and sat across from him. "Why didn't you tell us?" Grange smiled, barely. "Because you wouldn't understand." "Try me." Grange leaned forward. His voice was steady. Too steady. They weren't prisoners. They were being saved. Saved from what? From themselves. The silence after that sentence lasted longer than the room could hold. Grange continued, as if giving a sermon. "We didn't kill them. We protected them. The world above was too loud, too cruel. We gave them peace, time, stillness. We removed the sins, not the souls." Rourke stared at him. His knuckles were white. "Who is we?" Grange only smiled. "You think this started with me?" That night, Rourke called a meeting with the lead agents on the case. The media hadn't caught wind yet. They had maybe 24 hours before the dam broke. A tech analyst showed footage recovered from the tunnel, old tape reels hidden in a rusted cabinet near the second door. It showed the chambers over time, people inside, growing older, swapping places, dying. One reel had the year marked on it, 1987. Another said 1974. Rourke pulled open a fresh file. Missing persons. Cold cases. One by one, he started checking names. They matched. He stared at the wall of faces. Dozens of people who had vanished without a trace. And now they were all under one roof. One holy, rotting roof. At 3:22 a.m., an agent burst into the room. She had been interviewing one of the survivors, a man with one eye and both wrists covered in scars. He had drawn something in the dust of the hospital window. A symbol. Rourke stared at it. It was a cross, upside down. The upside-down cross wasn't just a symbol. It was a signature. Rourke had seen it before, carved into trees near missing person sites, etched faintly into stone walls in abandoned shelters. He never made the connection until now. It wasn't satanic. It wasn't religious. It was territorial. The survivor who drew it didn't speak again. He just pressed his forehead to the glass, eyes open but empty. Behind him, the nurse whispered that his scars were self-inflicted, patterns that matched those of 2 other survivors. They were symbols, too. Not letters. Coordinates. Rourke sat in his office, the lights off, fingers scanning over maps, files, and forgotten news clippings. Every missing person tied to St. Mary's led back to one organization, the Church of the Drowned. It was a fringe sect from the 1960s, condemned by every major religious institution. Believed to have dissolved after its founder, Father Caleb Rhyme, disappeared in 1973. But it hadn't dissolved. It had gone underground. Literally. Rourke found a photograph in an archived article. Father Rhyme standing outside a weathered chapel with a group of silent men. No smiles. No joy. Just eyes that had already seen too much. One of those men, in the corner, face half-shadowed, looked familiar. Rourke enhanced the image. It was Ezra Grange. They brought Grange back in. He didn't deny it. He didn't blink. He only asked one question. Did you open the fifth door yet? There's no fifth door. At least, not that they knew of. But Rourke felt the floor shift beneath him, not literally, but emotionally, as if the truth was deeper than any foundation. Meanwhile, more survivors were waking up. One woman, early 30s, spoke a single name when shown a series of photographs. She pointed to a man in a suit. That one. It was Judge Henry Voss. Still active. Currently presiding over human trafficking cases in Pennsylvania. Clean record. Respected name. The woman cried when she saw him. He locked me in the dark. He said I would thank him one day. The team froze. If Voss was involved, this went beyond a single church. It was systemic. Protected. Rourke contacted Internal Affairs. They warned him to tread carefully. Voss had powerful allies. Accusations without proof would be political suicide. Careers would end. Rourke didn't care. He met with forensic specialist Elian Harker, whose younger brother disappeared in 2001. She had volunteered for the case, hoping for closure. When she saw the cross symbol and the tunnel, she paled. My brother drew this in his notebook. Weeks before he vanished. She dug out a box from her apartment, his old journals, filled with sketches of tunnels, cages, and churches. One page had a list. At the top, places they take the broken. Rourke read the list. 5 churches. 1 already searched. 1 burned in a fire. 3 remained. He marked them all. Before they could act, news broke. A whistleblower from the hospital leaked footage, grainy images of the survivors, pale and shaking, crawling into sunlight. The footage went viral in under 2 hours. The world reacted with shock, horror, and disbelief. The Church of the Drowned was real, and it had survived. Public pressure mounted. Protesters gathered outside St. Mary's. Reporters flooded the FBI with calls. Politicians demanded answers. Rourke pushed forward anyway. They issued a subpoena for Judge Voss. He didn't show. When agents visited his home, they found it empty, doors wide open, no signs of struggle. Just a desk covered in ashes and a single page. We were never hiding. You just stopped looking. That night, a survivor died in her hospital bed. Poison. The nurse who administered her disappeared. It was a message. Rourke met with Elian in a safe house far from town. They laid out every document, every map, every name. In the center was a single word written in red. Drowned. The truth was bigger than a cult. It was a network. A system. And it was still active. Rourke stared at the red word, heart pounding. Then Elian placed a drawing next to it, something her brother sketched weeks before vanishing. It was a church, not St. Mary's. Another one, with a 5th door marked beneath the altar. They had only just begun to dig. The chapel in upstate New York stood like a skeleton under the moonlight. Snow clung to its eaves, but the roof had caved in long ago. Elian's car was parked nearby, engine still warm. Her bag was inside, untouched. Her badge, too. But not her weapon. Rourke arrived minutes later, heart pounding, gun drawn. He called her name, but the woods swallowed his voice. Inside the chapel, the floor had rotted through. A trapdoor lay beneath the altar, just like before. This one had been forced open. Fresh boot prints led down. He descended alone. The air was damp. The walls were stone, carved with strange notations and dates. A torch flickered ahead. He moved slowly, eyes adjusting, gun raised. Then he heard it. Breathing. Heavy, raspy, close. He turned the corner and found her. Elian sat on the ground, wrists zip-tied, blood trickling from her temple. She was conscious but dazed. Rourke moved fast, cutting the restraints. She tried to speak but only got out one word: run. Too late. From behind, a figure slammed Rourke into the wall. He dropped the gun. Another man stepped out of the shadows, face masked, holding a syringe. They wrestled. Rourke managed to knock the syringe free and drive an elbow into the man's throat. The attacker gasped and crumpled. The second fled into the tunnels. Rourke helped Elian to her feet. "We have to go," she said, voice hoarse. She led him to a chamber further and newer than the others. There were computers humming in the dark. Monitors displayed biometric data, surveillance feeds, lists of names. All FBI agents. Dozens of them. Many marked with dates. Some were already marked, collected. It wasn't just about the churches. It was about control, selection, infiltration. They weren't investigating corruption. They were cleaning it up. Rourke pulled a hard drive from the server and pocketed it. Elian tried to copy more data, but alarms blared suddenly through the chamber. Red lights spun to life. They ran. Back through the tunnel. Up the trapdoor. Into the night. A black SUV screeched around the corner of the chapel. Rourke opened fire. The driver swerved. The vehicle crashed into a tree. Flames licked the hood. Two men staggered out, coughing. One carried a badge, FBI, but it wasn't real. Rourke shot out the tires, grabbed Elian, and ran into the trees. They didn't stop until they reached the road. By dawn, they were in a motel on the state line, wrapped in silence. Rourke uploaded the contents of the stolen drive. The files included blueprints for other underground facilities, lists of subjects, financial reports signed by court officials, judges, even politicians. Every one of them involved in funding or covering the experiments. It was a system. Elian opened a file labeled VOS/Protocol 5. Inside were memos. They described an upcoming offering plan for the fifth location. Scheduled in 48 hours. 12 new candidates were already in transport. The facility wasn't under a church. It was under the city. A courthouse built in 1921, long since shut down due to structural concerns. But the file said it had been reactivated. Quietly, secretly, as Command Station 5. Rourke stared at the blueprints. Tunnels led from the basement to service lines, old subway spurs, and 3 hidden entrances. He recognized one. It was beneath the abandoned records department. The one he'd walked past a dozen times. They weren't hiding it in the woods anymore. They were hiding it in plain sight. They had 2 days, 12 victims, and no backup. Elian looked at him and said, "We can't go through channels." "No," Rourke said. "We go through the walls." The storm rolled in as night fell over the city. Rain swept across rooftops and hissed in the gutters. From the rooftop of the adjacent building, Rourke stared down at the courthouse. Lights glowed faintly behind the frosted windows. Power was running through a place that had been listed as condemned for years. Beside him, Elian adjusted the shoulder strap of her gear. She was pale but steady. Beneath them, the streets were empty. The courthouse looked forgotten, but its walls held a secret built beneath decades of concrete and lies. The plan was simple. No team, no agency, no time. They would enter through the collapsed service tunnel that once led to the city's old postal vault, now buried under tons of steel. But a break in the maps, found in the stolen hard drive, had revealed a breach point. If they were right, it led straight under the courthouse basement. They dropped down through the construction shaft and moved quietly through the dark. Their flashlights cut through dust and webs, revealing graffiti-covered stone, pipes twisted with age, and tracks where something heavy had been dragged recently. They passed an old elevator shaft. It was active, barely. A hum pulsed behind the sealed door. Rourke marked it on his mental map. Then they moved forward, weapons drawn, breath shallow. After an hour, they found it. A steel hatch embedded into the concrete floor. A keypad. A biometric reader. Elian knelt beside it and slid a probe into the panel's access seam. The lights flickered, then turned green. The hatch groaned open. They stepped into silence. Below, the corridor was clean, lit, modern. Surveillance cameras pointed outward, not inward. Rourke disabled them one by one as they moved, making their way toward the heart of the facility. The layout matched the digital blueprint. Command Station 5 wasn't just real, it was fully operational. They passed labs, holding cells, and bunkers built into the foundation. Some were empty, others weren't. Behind one pane of reinforced glass, they found 4 people, 2 women and 2 men, all chained, sedated. One of the women had a federal badge clipped to her torn coat. Elian reached for the release panel, but Rourke held her back. "Tripwires," he whispered. "They're using them as bait." She nodded grimly. They planted charges instead, marking each wall. The mission had shifted. It was no longer just about exposing this. It was about ending it. They moved deeper. Then, from ahead, footsteps. Not rushed. Calm. A man appeared in the corridor, mid-50s, white hair, sharp suit, no fear in his eyes. He held no weapon. "You made it further than I expected," he said evenly. Rourke raised his gun. "Step back." The man didn't flinch. "You're not here on orders. I checked the Bureau's records. You're ghosts. So the only question left is, how far are you willing to go?" Elian stepped forward. "As far as this goes." He smiled faintly. "Then you already know you're late." Suddenly, sirens. In the holding chambers, gas began to pour from vents. Rourke fired. The man dropped, shot through the chest. Elian rushed to the control panel and killed the feed to the gas lines. Alarms screamed in protest. They ran to the cells. Released the locks. The prisoners stumbled out, coughing, weak but alive. Then the walls shook. The countdown had started, self-destruct. Protocol 7. The man in the suit had triggered it with his final breath. They had less than 10 minutes. Rourke grabbed the hard drives. Elian guided the prisoners. They retraced their steps, back through the hallways, through the steel hatch, into the tunnel. The rumble behind them grew louder. Ceiling panels began to fall. They emerged into the street just as the courthouse behind them erupted in fire. From blocks away, the blaze looked like a forgotten war zone. In the morning, local news blamed a gas leak. No names were mentioned. No agents. No mission. Nothing survived the fire except what Rourke now held in his hands. Data, proof, and stories. Dozens of survivors now scattered across the country, many still too afraid to speak. But the files had names, dates, contracts, and at the top, people still walking free. Elian sat beside him, bandaged and silent. "What do we do now?" she asked. Rourke looked ahead, eyes locked on the horizon. "We keep pulling the thread," he said, "until the whole thing unravels." They drove into the morning light, the wreckage behind them buried in smoke. But the truth, finally, was on the move. 2 weeks passed. The story never made national news. A small fire at a condemned courthouse in a forgotten part of the city, buried between election headlines and celebrity gossip. But within classified circles, whispers had started. Whispers about a breach, a leak, and a possible rogue operation that exposed something buried far deeper than corruption. Rourke sat across from an old contact inside an unmarked safe house near Denver. The man's name was Braddock, ex-intelligence, now off-the-books contractor. He wore a flannel shirt, gray beard grown wild, eyes sharp. "You're playing with fire," Braddock said quietly, flipping through the decrypted files on the drive. "These names, these aren't just operatives. These are architects, people who built the system." Rourke nodded. "We've been chasing soldiers, but the ones funding it, organizing it, repurposing the Bureau for black market influence operations, they've been invisible." Braddock leaned back. "Not anymore." Elian stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She handed Braddock a second drive. "Satellite intercepts. They're moving assets. 3 locations. One's already gone dark." Braddock studied the coordinates. "That's Langston Airfield. That's where we start," Rourke said. By nightfall, they were wheels up in a black market charter plane, heading for the airstrip buried deep in the Arizona desert. It hadn't been active for 10 years on paper, but aerial imagery showed traffic. Heat signatures. One specific hangar lit with motion-controlled floodlights. They landed half a mile out. "Move in on foot." The air was hot still, buzzing with insects. Their boots crunched gravel as they approached the rusted fence. Beyond it, a sleek transport aircraft idled in silence. Men in black uniforms moved containers beneath the wings. No insignias, no flags, just clean, efficient movement. They split. Elian circled the north side to disable the external power relays. Rourke slid under the perimeter and took position near a stack of empty crates. From here, he could see the hangar interior, but like a lab, not a warehouse. Then, something unexpected. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Young mid-20s, arms restrained, surrounded by two guards. He didn't look scared. He looked angry. Rourke adjusted his scope. The boy, according to the drive, was named Alex Marston. He was listed as Biotech Package Alpha. Not a criminal. Not a threat. A whistleblower. Before he could process that, one of the guards drew a syringe. Rourke acted. His first shot took the injector through the shoulder. The second dropped the other guard. Chaos erupted. Lights cut out. Elian had done her part. In the confusion, Rourke ran forward, grabbed Alex, and pulled him behind the crates. Alex looked at him, startled. "You're not one of them." "No. But I need you to move. Now." They ran through the shadows, dodging fire, as alarms lit the sky in red. Elian rejoined them near the outer wall. She tossed Rourke a flash grenade. Diversion? He nodded. 3 seconds. He tossed it toward the parked aircraft. The blast blinded the tarmac crew. They dashed toward the secondary gate, climbed the fence, and dropped into the brush on the other side. Helicopters were coming. They had minutes. A van waited where Braddock had promised. They piled inside. Elian slammed the gas as the first searchlight swept the tree line behind them. Inside, Alex shook, but his voice was steady. "You don't understand. What they built into me, it's not science fiction. It's not weapons. It's insurance." Rourke leaned forward. "For what?" "For the people running all of this. I'm the failsafe. If they disappear, I go with them. But not just me, there are 5 of us." Braddock turned from the passenger seat. "Where are the others?" Alex looked out the back window as the airstrip vanished into the distance. "They're already in motion. They'll come for me." Rourke sat back. The fire they started hadn't just exposed a black site. It had triggered a chain reaction. Now the system would strike back. And they had less time than they thought. The safe house was deep in the Rockies, reachable only by an unmarked road and buried behind 2 miles of pine forest. Braddock chose it for one reason: silence. But even silence was temporary. Inside, Alex sat at a makeshift table, hands trembling slightly as he wrote on a yellow legal pad, pages filled with diagrams, names, systems. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. But he was remembering. Elian watched from across the room, her hand never far from her sidearm. "He's cracked," she whispered to Rourke. "We push too hard, we lose him." Rourke stood by the window, staring at the treetops. "We don't need him sane. We need him honest." Braddock entered, phone in hand. Intercepted chatter. "Someone's moving toward us." No call signs. No affiliation. "Time?" Rourke asked. 2 hours max." Elian loaded her rifle. "Then we finish this now." They gathered around Alex. He looked up, eyes wide but clear. "They're not what you think. They're not just corrupt. They're rebuilding the Bureau into a private state. Something that answers to no flag." Rourke leaned in. "Who runs it?" "There's no name. Just a codename vault. No face. No voice. Just systems. Dead drops. Digital shadows. But they use people like me, engineered whistleblowers, programmed to leak controlled truths. When someone gets too close, they detonate a scandal, collapse an enemy." Rourke felt the weight of that. It explained years of confusion. Unsolved leaks. Agents killed. Cases buried. Alex continued, voice steadier. "I was supposed to release files pinning a cyber attack on a foreign state. But it wasn't foreign. It was Vault. And I refused." Braddock stepped closer. "Where are the original files?" Alex reached into his jacket and pulled out a small chip, cold metal, black shell. "This has everything. Not just the attack. Funding routes. FBI reassignments. And names. Real names. Suddenly, the power flickered, then cut out completely. Everyone froze. Braddock moved first, pulling blackout curtains shut. Rourke grabbed the sat phone and tried dialing. Nothing. Jamming. Elian moved to the back door and cracked it open slightly. Thermal sweep, she whispered. They've got heat drones. Braddock nodded. They want him alive. That buys us 10 minutes. Rourke opened the chip and began downloading the data to a shielded laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded. A stream of classified files flowed across the screen. But so did something else, a blinking red message. Remote wipe initiated. Alex gasped. They found it. Rourke yanked the Wi-Fi transceiver. Buy me 60 seconds. Outside, the trees began to shake. No gunfire. Just movement. Elian, Braddock, and Rourke took positions. Entryways covered, windows locked. Alex curled in the corner, covering his ears. Then a knock at the door. Not a battering ram. A knock. Rourke raised his weapon and spoke low. Who is it? A man's voice answered. I'm not here for him. I'm here for you. They all looked at each other. The door creaked open. A man in a suit stood calmly, no weapon drawn, hands at his sides. Mid-40s. Neatly groomed. Ice cold. You're Rourke. You've done well. But this ends now. Braddock stepped forward. You Vault. The man smiled. Vault isn't a person. Vault is the last wall. The one between chaos and what's left of order. Elian raised her rifle. You kill whistleblowers and call it order? I preserve systems. Systems that protect people from truths they're not ready for. Rourke stepped forward, laptop still open in his hand. We're not destroying the system. We're rebooting it. The man's smile faded. Then you're not leaving this mountain. Suddenly, gunfire erupted outside. Automated drones, not human squads. The room became a battlefield. Windows shattered. Elian and Braddock laid down cover fire. Rourke grabbed Alex and pulled him into the back room. He uploaded the last files into a secure satellite relay, the only way to get the data out before the wipe completed. The screen flashed green. Upload complete. But the house was falling. Grenades hit the porch. Smoke and flames filled the room. Elian took a hit to the shoulder. Braddock went down trying to hold the back exit. Rourke turned to Alex. You trust me? Alex nodded. They jumped through the back window, rolled down the slope, and vanished into the forest. Behind them, the safe house exploded. No evidence. No bodies. Just silence. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, news outlets across the globe began receiving encrypted files from unknown sources. Leaks, audits, memos, names. Vault wasn't dead. But now it wasn't invisible either. And Rourke knew a bigger war had just begun.